Okay, so we are going to talk tonight about the um, rabbinic responses to the Spanish influenza of 1918. And some of you perhaps have seen the source booklet, which I linked to in the post. And I'm going to be using that, following through it. And I'm going to try and do it at somewhat of a faster clip because of the time limitations which we have. So we're going to start with, of course, the first page. And you see that back in 1918, well, as today, many schools had to close. And here you have in Boston, the Orthodox schools had to close because the same gezerah which we have today, they had back then. And on the next page, if you have the Cleveland Plain Dealer, you will see that some things don't change. It says towards the bottom of the second column, improvised Jewish synagogues, one at Scoville Avenue, et cetera, and the other Woodland Avenue, were visited by patrolman Popowski and Kevar, and 9 men were taken to Central Police Station on a charge of violating the quarantine, notwithstanding their plea that they were worshiping. So Jews have a long history of not abiding by the rules necessarily which are imposed. Now, the question is what exactly the Rabbanim wrote at the time. Second, let me give somebody else the password here. Here. Okay, well, so I'll give when I can contact him, I will give it to him. The question is what exactly the Rabbanim at the time wrote, and I tried to give a little background on each of the Rabbanim here, which I'm quoting, which we're going to see. The first one is Reb Mordechai Tzvi Schwartz, who was a rabbi in Cleveland, and you have a bio of him on the next page if you have the handout. And he wrote an interesting sefer, which is in the following page, which is a sefer called Drushe Chochma V'Das. Drushe Chochma V'das was evidently a book about how, if you see the title page, about how to reconcile science and Torah. And it's interesting how he took this for influenza outbreak as being the fault of science. And if you take a look at the next page, he says that in the second last paragraph, it says that המלחמה הביאה איבדה 6 מיליון נפשות, אשר מתו 20 מיליון נפשות נפצעו, 20 million died, 20 million were wounded, 9 מיליון ניסומים נשארו, there were 9 million ניסומים, 5 מיליון אמונות ניסומים, 5 million אמונות, etc., etc. And then he says, Vamesim b'magefa shelafu, the last line, influenza, shehipashto achar milchama b'chol olam. Why did it happen, according to him? Misibos hashchosas havir, harsi, because the poison air, sheba misibas hamilchama, that came as a result of the war, Allah kolkach ad erech 21 million nefesh. 21 million people died because of the bad air, which was left over from the time of the war. So at that point, he said it was an inevitable result. If you look at the previous paragraphs, he talks about the aglos hakitor, mesilos habarzel, automobilim, and the koach electric, and so on and so forth. In other words, mankind was responsible for the plague. The fact that mankind created all these tools of war inevitably led to this result of the people, all these people dying. So it's interesting because he doesn't say it's because of Averis. He doesn't even say it's something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a unique relationship with Am Yisrael, and that's why it happened. It happened because of the war which preceded it. And of course, this is part of his book, which is blamed science and progress, which is used by mankind inappropriately for most of the evils which happened in the world. The next rabbi who we have to see is Rabbi Gedalia Silverstone. Gedalia Silverstone was the rabbi in Washington, D.C. And he writes in his sefer, and it's just for him, Kesef Nivchar. Obviously, Kesef Nivchar is a play on silver stone. So he writes two places about it, and it's interesting because you find very little written in general, and I've searched wide and far for things about the things which are said in the rabbinic literature back then. And it's an interesting thing also in general. There's very little written about influenza, relatively speaking, to other plagues in the course of mankind. It seems because people were so much involved in the war, and it was a direct result and led from the war, that people were not writing specifically about the plague. But he does here, and then this Jewish hesped is on page 10 of the handout. He gives a hesped on a fellow who passed away, Rabbi Avram Levitz, 10 days after his daughter passed away, and 10 days later, so these the two back to back. And he brings an interesting drasha, which he says here her name of one of his ancestors. David Melch says unto him, in your anger, do not rebuke me, and in your anger, also don't torture me. Because your arrows have landed on me. So he says that the worst makkah is a makkah which comes in a place which was already wounded. It was if HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent a makkah somewhere where it was people were healthy, that's not so bad. But we were already beaten down, and therefore it is much, much worse. And here too, the makkah came again 10 days later after the first makkah. And then he says in the second to last paragraph on page 10, he says, Hashem, Washington. See if other people want the password here. Let's try to get it then.
While you're doing that, do you know anything else about these Rabbanim that gave these answers?
Yes, that's why I put I put in their biographies.
Oh, I didn't see.
Between each one, there is a biography.
I
think in order that, and I'm going to mention a little bit about that later on as well. Get here to WhatsApp so I can change this here. It's definitely an anti-Semitic plot on Zoom's part to require password Dafka today. So as I mentioned that Rabbi Silverstone was the rabbi in Washington, D.C. His son was the rabbi after him. Eventually, of course, that shul turned conservative, but he was from Yerei Shamayim and one of the main rabbanim in early 20th century America. And now we go on to what he says here again. He says that Washington should come on these Yatsu by Magefa Malechas. How many of them were punished in this tragic plague? And many fathers followed their children in death. And many left at the height of the plague in Cheshvan Tafresh, which is October 1918. Which is very bitter. We can understand what Yirmiyahu Navi said. Even though I cried out, Akash Baruch Hu closed my prayer off. How so? When there's a plague, you go into the Avnei Shul, that's what you do in order to try and get Akash Baruch Hu to have Rachmanus. So it was not possible to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu not possible to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to have Rachmanos because of this Makkah. So because the Batei Knesset were closed. So he believes that obviously the shuls being closed had an impact, very negative impact, on their possibility of being able to have a Yeshua. In the next page, he says a very interesting thing, page 11. He says, Allah mavis b'chalonenu. That it says in Meicha, the death came into our window. What does it mean, into our window? So he says, into our window means the death comes, the Malach comes at a normal time. When somebody's 70, 80 years old, then he can come through the front door. When young people are dying, that's Olam Avos V'Chalonenu. He has to sneak in like a thief through the window in order to take away a younger neshama. And then he finishes off this piece with a very interesting idea about what one should do at a time of a plague. He says, Chazal say, Movakama Daf Samech, when there's a plague in the city, the person should not go in the middle of the street because the Malach HaMavis is there. Only you should go to the sides of the street. If a person, there's shalom in the city, everything is at peace, then a person should specifically go in the middle of the street because on the side of the street is where the Malach HaMavis is. So he says, what does this mean? How can we understand this from our own Muslims? So he says, normally the Rambam says you should always go b'derech hamamutza. You always go in the middle way. That's the way to go. But you don't go in the middle way at a time of a plague. At a time of a plague, you have to go completely in the way of trying to find the best possible way to be mefashvish b'ma'asov and to be mischazek and medaktek al kol ha'matzim, to conduct yourself with the utmost holiness and the utmost tara that you possibly can. So normally, Shas Shalom, we should go be'emtza derech, in the middle. Shas the plague, you have to find something, he says, in which to express an additional kedusha, additional tara. It's a very nice idea. And that's in the first chiluk of his drushes. In the second chiluk of his drushes, he has about Kiyah Shofar on page 13, and he says there that the Kiyah Shofar for year 19, Taf Reish Pei, which is the following year, he says that 1919, he says, obviously we did not have the proper kavanah Kiyah Shofar that past year. Because it says, I took a shofar had we had the proper awe and proper fear during the previous Rosh Hashanah, this would not have happened, as pointed out in one of the notes here. The 1918 flu attacked the middle-aged more intensely, the older, the young, but obviously everybody was affected in some way, shape, or form. And therefore he says that this year we have to change. And if we want the plague to stop on Rosh Hashanah this year, we have to have much more tshuva than we had last year, because obviously last year was not working. So here he says another idea, which is very interesting, which is that the reason why the plague occurred is because we didn't do tshuva, each person of what they should have done tshuva last year. And this is an interesting trend which we have here, which is very different than today's coronavirus, which is that Rabbanim back then, they focused on what all of us can do and what we should do in general, not pointing out anything specific, and they didn't actually blame anybody for it. Today, in today's day and age, many Rabbanim decide that they know what averos were done and why the coronavirus occurred, and they can usually they tell other people what they did was wrong, such as, we know that in this past week's Connections in Muncie, there are many, many pages about how women's long shaitels caused the coronavirus. So this type of talk did not exist back in 1918. People did not, perhaps they hadn't thought of it then, but people thought, what have I done wrong? What can I do individually in order to perfect myself? Let's not blame others. And some of the things which people did in order to get away from the Magefa are very interesting. And it's interesting how they are scoffed at too. In the next page, you have a biography of Ramaz, Ramosha Margolis, who was one of the foremost rabbis at the time of the plague. the rabbi in the shiur in New York, in Manhattan, and on the page after that you have what he wrote. He wrote in the foreword about, or rather, the foreword published what he said, what to do against this magefa, and it's very similar to what we see nowadays. And he says there in the paragraph which begins Heyos, I'm not going to read the Yiddish, I'll just translate what it says. He says that you should say Keteris B'tzibur, and you should, the yeshivas and the shuls and the high classes of Talmud Torah, they should, besides the Torahs, they should say also Psukim, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel from Kapitel Yud Zayin in Bamidbar, from Vayomer Moshe El Aaron until Vatiyotzer Magefa. And every Monday and Thursday they should say B'tzibur Shloshes Midos and Oshamnu, and the Pismon Rafeino Tachlui Gefen Poria, which is the Slichos Tachlui Yulodim. And he says, with this, we are going to be, perhaps we'll be able to get out of this plague. And he says he's writing this in the name of the entire Agudas Rabbanim. He was the head of the Agudas Rabbanim at the time. So this is published in the foreword. The foreword was a pretty anti-religious paper, and the foreword afterward makes of course fun of Rabbi Margolius' suggestion. And he says, they say maybe you should send it to the board, which is in charge of finding remedies for the general public. They should know about this, because surely this will stop the magefa, and it's a terrible thing that they don't know about it. And then they bring down in the second to last paragraph what Mr. Shantis, who was the head of the Interborough, the president for an Interborough Rapid Transit Company, and the IRT. And he said, our subway lines have much better air than other subway lines. So ride our subway lines because the air is better and it's less likely for a person to get sick. So the foreword suggests that maybe he should charge an extra nickel for riding on his subway line. And it compares what Rabbi Margolius said to what the head of the Interborough Transit said, in order to make fun of both of them at the same time, kill two birds with one stone. So this is obviously what From Judaism was up against in 1918. On the next page, you have the biography of Reb Gavriel Zev Margolius. Reb Gavriel Zev Margolius, not to be confused with the previous Rabbi Margolius, not only not to be confused, they were arch rivals in the rabbinate of New York in the early 20th century. The Ramaz, the first Rabbi Margolius, led the Agudas Rabbanim, and Reb Gavriel Zev Margolius led the Knesset HaRabbanim, which was the competing organization. So somebody wrote here that Rabbi Mordechai Zev Schwartz was their great-grandfather, Martin Schwartz. Okay, very good, very cool. So the Rabbi Zev Margolius also put out his instructions for what people should do in the Magefa, but it was a very different set of instructions. And it's on the next page. It also appeared in several places, but this is how it appeared in the foreword. And the archivist at the foreword, Mrs. Chaya Pollack, was kind enough to translate it for me. If you take a look at page 19, a note about influenza from Reb Velvela. Gavriel Zev, let's go Reb Velvela. We're repeating the same for Rabbi Velvela verbatim, the foreword says. Open announcement. Currently, during the influenza epidemic, God save us. I wish to let the public know that those who must sit Shiva, may God protect them, may and must ease up in observing the laws of mourning. That is to say, those who live in tight quarters or those who must take in fresh air are permitted to go outdoors for several hours daily for health reasons. Also, anyone lacking someone to pick up provisions for them may themselves go shopping for essentials. Also, you may wear shoes even in the house in order to not get chilled. God have mercy. It is also permitted to change underwear for hygienic purposes and when necessary, bathe, taking care not to catch cold afterwards. We must hope that God, blessed be his name, will have mercy on us in the world and remove all sickness and evil ones and suffering spreading throughout the world, and will tell the destroying angel to cease. I will bring us peace and grace as desired by all God's nation, as desired by those seeking the blessed God's swift compassion. Gavriel Zev Margolius, chief of the Jewish Court of Law for the people of Israel of New York. So this is Rabbi Margolius gave health advice. It's interesting that this Rabbi Margolius gave health advice. The other Rabbi Margolius gave advice as to tefillah. I'm not sure if this is because of their rivalry or this is just different personalities. But I think there's different personalities are involved, as we'll see a little bit later. Now, on the next page, you have what some people did. Even this year, there was a wedding in a cemetery in Bnei Brak, which after the Magefa started, which was called the Schwarze Chasna. And it happened in several places in America, Mount Hebron, New York, and in Philadelphia back in 1918. And this is an article from the Sentinel, which is a Reformed Jewish paper, that doesn't really, of course, doesn't believe in this in this practice. And you'll see in the first paragraph here that this is happened. New York Yiddish dailies on November 4th, 1918, reported that a wedding was celebrated the previous day in Mount Hebron, New York. That's a cemetery, and a large attendance poured money into the hands of a Hasidic rabbi, who whatever may have been the effect of the weird ceremony on staying the epidemic of the influenza, was undoubtedly benefited by it. This Oriental practice transferred to New York, to the New World, suggests an investigation into its history and psychology. And he gives a whole, more or less balanced review of the history of it. And in fact, this is something which was done, and they used to take a Yosem and a Yosaima, the neighbor Ostok, I think Yosem, I'm not sure it was Yosaima, and marry them off to try and be Ma'ore Rachmei Shamayim. So this is something which was done at the time, but by certain people. But it seems that it was specifically people who were Hasidic in nature, and not the Litvish. And that was a dichotomy back in America, even at that time, as we shall see momentarily. In the meantime, let's go to the next page, which is from 1916, from the Shem Shmuel. Of course, the Shem Shmuel is the Avnei Nezer's son, one of the great Rabbis and great authors of Machshava in Eastern Europe. And he has an interesting letter to his son-in-law. And again, it's from 1916, so I'm not sure it was from the same Magefa, but it was certainly something where there was a lung disease. And he says to his son-in-law about his fasting on Kippur, you must heed the doctors. You cannot decide to be machmer on yourself. That is clear. You have to eat on Yom Kippur whatever they tell you to eat, and chalil to be machmer. And then in the second paragraph, he says, very interesting. Surely you remember that which you heard from me many times. There's a question in the chat where there's a halachic source for this, the wedding. No, there's no halachic source. Before that, the fresh air idea is linked to the old idea that miasmas cause illness. Probably true. And then how can you get a copy of the materials? I put a Dropbox link on the Facebook and on my blog where you can download the materials. So he says, you heard from me many times. You also have them batel l'das Torah. So das Torah is not a new thing which came up recently in 1916. But you mean even they tell you that left is right. And that which you mevatel das the das Torah, the kof oznichol ishmati b'chachamim, and you incline your ear to hear the word chachamim, who shava yoser me'akol. It's worth more than everything else. Val kain ain't only staying lototum b'yom kippurim. Why? And here's a knech. Ki betach shetishma l'das chachmei Torah shetzivu l'shelo latzum im rofei tziva shelo latzum who shava yoser me'kratzayim. He's saying the Das Torah are saying, listen to the doctors. And since listening to Das Torah is the primary manifestation of Yadus in our day and age, so therefore listen to the doctors, because that is what we tell you to do. And so there's an interesting connection here that Das Torah is listen to the doctors. And so moving right along, because again we're short of time, the next page is from the Yiddish Togbat in 1921. And it just shows that also in Sfas that year, where there was influenza was raged, influenza came on and off through 1924, they closed the Chadorim. To leave their Krankheit seinen da geschlossen geworden alle Chadorim Talmud Torah und Shul. Okay, so this is something which again was done. We just got a gift from Zoom. They removed the 40-minute time limit on our group meeting. Okay, I will slow down.
The first time you go over, they give you extension.
Oh, yeah? Okay, this is something which went on of course, the closing of shuls. It's not a new thing. People sometimes say this is an unprecedented situation, which would say it's not an unprecedented situation. Unfortunately, there was precedent in the past as well. Now, on the next page, you have the cover of this week's Community Connections for Muncie, where it says, and prominently, where you can get, even on the web, a Shmira Kamea from the Rabbi Kodesh Rabbi Shaila Zichra Zecher. Rabbi Shaila Kastira is mostly known for the mice and the Shmira from mice, but obviously he was a very holy man in many, many ways. And that's the focus on mice is not what he really was. But here it's interesting, in the fine print it says, this is geschrieben geworden nach a Mispor mit Zumzum von Kameas. We put together a small number of Kameas durch die Einiklach von Rabbi Yeshayala. His descendants wrote these Kameas. Und es wird gegeben werden für jeden was tun zu helfen. Rav Loshia. Of course, you get it because you helped us. So it's a money-making scheme in the end, but they're handwritten. And that's an important point because this became a major point of contention in the Magefa in 1918, as we shall see. Now, next page, you have a picture of Rabbi Yirmiyahu Nylander. I don't know much about him. He was a rabbi in the Bronx. And he was, as you'll see, in the next page, you have Rabbi Dr. Philip Hillel Klein, who was a grandson-in-law of Reb Sham Shapol Hirsch and was the most prominent Hungarian rabbi in New York at the time. And evidently, Rabbi Klein sided with Rabbi Nylander on the commerce of Kameas, as we shall see in a few moments. In the meantime, you have a couple of other people who figure in this conversation. Reb Velvela, from before, figures prominently. The Tolner Rebbe, Reb David Mordechai Twersky, who was I don't think the Tolner Rebbe in Boston was maybe they were cousins, brothers, I have no idea, but evidently Tolner Yerushalayim descends from him. And then you have the Radowitzer Rebbe. I don't know much about the Radowitzer Rebbe, but he obviously has, it's not on this page, but he obviously has a very, very ornate mausoleum in the cemetery you can find at kvarim.com. So he was obviously one of the early Rebbes in America. So going to the next page. This is a kind of yellow journalism at its best. This is an investigative reporter from their Tog, who decided to find out about Kameas that Rabbi Yirmiyahu Nylander was selling. And if you take a look at the fine print, the first column. Now, the way this works is that this article goes, the first column of this article goes on to the next page. That's the way this website prints it out. So, but I don't think I'm gonna have to refer to that. But it says here, price for the Shmir Magefa. What is the price? 6 shtick for $1, right? You get six pieces of this Shmira, which is here, as you can see in the middle, and it's a pretty simple kamea. You can buy that for six for $1. And the writer is pretty nasty to Rabbi Nylander about his making money, a quick buck off the system. And then he went to ask Reb Velvela, and he went to ask the Tolner and the Radovitzer what they held about these kameas. And Reb Velvela was a real Litvak, and you can see this in the last column here. Bin ich zum Ersten weg zu Reb Velvelin from Adas Yisrael. First person I went to ask about kameas is Reb Velvela. Hat mir gleich erklärt, he immediately told me, as halt in ganze nicht von kein kameas. There's not many kameas. As jeden Tag kommen zu ihm Menschen, every day people come to him. In die hundreds of people, betten schulos, and they ask for schulos in order to get healed, go to say themselves to the Magefa. Und as als was zog sei, to all that they say is as they zola sein. I say, sorry, is as they zollen sein Yidden. They should be Jews of Hiten Yiddishkeit, keep Yiddishkeit, und sollen überhaupt sich nicht verlassen auf Nissim. And they should not fly on Nissim, glatt in der Welt rein. And I guess on any Nissim in this world. Or man fühlt sich nicht mit Allemen, if you feel not like other people, other as wer in familiar krank, or there's a sickness family, soll man gleich rufen a doctor. Immediately go to the doctor. Und die einzige Brache, the only Brache, the einzige Vanish war verwünscht jedem is that, and the only thing which I give Brache I give, the only wish I have for everybody, as the refuah was the doctor get, the food which the doctor gives them, soll sein zum gesund, should be healthy for them. As soll helfen, that will help. So he didn't want to talk about the command directly, but he did mention that it's an easy way for a Jew to make a buck. And then he went from Velvela, he went to the Toner. And the Toner said in the last paragraph, a kameh wird nicht aufgeschätzt nachdem was dort ist geschrieben. So it doesn't work unless it's handwritten. Nor like them wer das schreibt, and also only that person who writes it. Was for a kavana jeder hat b'shas shrimen. As what for a kavana yes depends on it makes it be effective. Or mit dem kameh was geschrieben mit 60 Jahr zurück, and besides that, to take a kameh which was from 60 years ago in Ungarn from Moshe Teitelbaum, on other land in a different time by under a sort Unglück, by a different misfortune, und das on Arbeit other von I mentioned. And that this should work. He goes on to say it doesn't work, and the article is cut off here, and the continuation is missing. It's missing from the website, from the archive, so I can't tell you what the writer of it said. But obviously, if the author B. Brown is quoting him, so then he must have said something against the Kameas. Now, in the next on page 30, you have the response of Rabbi Nylander in the November 4th edition, 1918, of their talk. And he was very, very upset at the sarcastic tone of the previous article, and he's not going to address that, but he wants to address what the toner said first. And he says that there were the kameas of Rav Moshe Teitelbaum were printed on paper and were in every Hungarian house. So that begs the question: if every Hungarian house printed, what good did they do? If they're saying that they were actually effective, if they're actually effective, they should have stopped the Magefa, whatever it was in Hungary 60 years ago, and evidently they were not necessarily effective if every house had it and they were still affected. Now, afterwards, he notes, and this is still true today, that there's a Shmira Leoledis, which is given out in America, given out, and people put on the cradle of the newborn child, which is printed. So you see that printed kameas have some validity to them, which is an interesting argument. And then he goes on to say, he brings down what he brings down that the toner said on the next page, page 31, that has to be handwritten and has to be done with kavana. So he says, well, of course, before he said Moshe Teitelbaum's kamea was printed in Hungary, but then he says in the second paragraph, if them can ich them toner maftiach sein. This I can promise the toner. As ich los kein mal und garne juken, I don't allow this to be printed but by Azah Knuppen Sadik. Not sure exactly what Knuppen means, but the Kamia, he explains the Kamia is gedruckt geworden by Reb Moshe Philip. Reb Moshe Philip, and he says in Houston Street, sorry, von wem es weiß jeder, everybody knows, as there is an Emerson Yishomer Shabbos, und mit Daktek, afilu b'mitzvahs kalos, shodem doshpa kovav, and he even keeps the mitzvahs kalos, und afilu sein Zetzer, even the person who sets the type, is oich am Daktek b'mitzvahs, His tickets misses un schemnit Shemnit on, I don't know what that means. I guess whatever it means nit on ahim afil regachas. He doesn't go even a moment without a hat. He always has his head covered. So obviously,
a knapper tzaddik means a minor or like a slim tzaddik.
Slim tzaddik. Okay, fine. Thank you.
I think he's taking a hit at the
toner.
The toner, saying he's not such a minor tzaddik.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And then he said about Reb Velvela, he also is upset because he says Reb Velvela said, as a halt in ganzen nit von kein kameas. But it's going to do with the Mishnah Shabbos, Daf Mem, which says, Lo yitzei b'chulei, v'lo kameas mancheina min mumche. Ava kamea mumche shari. Now, the truth is that the kamea in the Gemara does not necessarily mean a written kamea. It means herbs, some sort of segula of some sort of type of, part of an animal. It's not referring to a written kameh. But nevertheless, his question is, what about the kamehs in the Gemara? And of course, there should be an answer to this, and we're going to see the answer. If you take a look at the next page, we have an Efricha Anklang, an open call, and by Yosef Margashas. Very often these names are pen names, so I don't know who this is, and don't know if we can know who it is. And this article is a very, very sarcastic article, which spreads over the course of the next 3 pages in the handout. Again, column after column. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, obviously, but in the first column they say, in the first page, we didn't want to name him. In our article, we didn't name the fellow. So, but now he came out and wrote a letter to us. So now we're going to attack him by name. And of course, they're going to decimate him. On the second page, he brings down a history of kameas on page 33. And he says, in Tanakh, we don't find any kameas. And in Chazal, where you find kameas, they obviously wanted to diminish their use. They were not interested in their widespread use because they didn't really hold of them. But they couldn't eliminate them altogether, which is very similar to what the Meiri says in Harvey Pachim about Shadim. Meiri says that Chazal did not believe in Shadim, but they had to give in to the public because the public believed in them. Were they to have dismissed Shadim altogether, then people would not have accepted Chazal. So it's an interesting thing. And then he says, and in the dark Middle Ages, people picked up many Narishkeiten, and they picked this idea of Kameas up, I should say, backtracking a bit. He says the initial Kameas were, since they weren't Tanakh, they were picked up in Bavel. And then they stayed with the Jews, and then he says they expanded in the Middle Ages. And then he brings down the Sefer Merazliel HaMalach, which many people keep on their dashboards, I think, as a Shmirah. Evidently, there are many Kameas there, and evidently, the Rabbi Yaakov Emden said it's a forgery. So therefore, he says it's not to be relied upon. And also the Shmirah Leoletis obviously is not to be relied upon. And then he says the problem is that the Hasidim in the Slavische Länder, the Slavic lands, evidently that's a put down, took the Kameas further, and that was a big tragedy. And he brings down that many rabbis who he believes would have negated the entire idea of Kameas. It's interesting, his list. This is on page 34. It's not for now to discuss it, but if you take a look at the list, Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, Rambam, Radak, Rabbi Daya Hapnini, I honestly never heard of before, the Rabag, Rabbi Shem Tov, Rabbi Shmuel Sartza, also I don't know, Rabbi Yosef Alba, the Barbanel, Baal Menorah Samor, Rabbi Yosef Shlomo Kandia, Baal Ola Shabbos, don't know that is it either, Rabbi Chaim Yor Bachrach, the Chabas Yor, Ma'aseh Tuvia, don't know that is, Seder Derech, don't know that is, Baal Chinuch Un Mera Andra. And then he brings down the Rambam. The Rambam for Moreh Buchim, Chelik Al Perak Mem Al, is the bottom paragraph on page 34. Don't let it come into your mind the craziness of those who write kameos. That which you'll hear from them. And what you find are strange books, which they put together from different names, lo yiru inyan b'shum banim, which don't mean anything. Yikru some shemos, and they're going to read those letters. V'chashu tzichem kedusha v'tara, and they need to think that it requires kusha v'tara, even though they're meaningless. Kol eila dvarim lo ya'os li'adam hashalem lisham kol shekain shiyamin. So he says we're not supposed to believe in kameas, and with this he dismisses all the people who rely on kameas. Going back now to the first page of this, which is on page 32, he brings down, he admits that Yonis Zayevshitz wrote kameas, and he says that's true. But Yaakov Emden said that all these kameas were Sabbatean. So therefore they were not supposed to rely upon. So if that's the case, then it means that not supposed to rely on these kameas either. But more than that, he says that the reason why many people in Germany, where there's an Eivshitz and Yaakov lived, went off the derech, is because this made a mockery of Judaism for them, and they therefore aufgehört zu respektieren sei Rabbanim. I'm not sure what aufgehört means. Let's see.
They stopped. They no longer. Aufgehört. They stopped.
They stopped respecting their Rabbanim. And he says, what if you do this now, then people are going to stop listening to Rabbanim now as well, especially since you claim that these are Badakum and Useh. And they're worthless. You're just trying to make a quick buck. And then going to the next page again, page 33, he says in the second paragraph, we have the broad letters to make a point. Verkauft sein they to them their billigen Preis von 6 Stücklach for Papier for blois $1. He sells them for $6 for a buck. Yeah, Shekoyach Rabbi Yirmiyahu Nylander. Can't Rabbi say, you know, anrufen azah handlung andrish, how you call such a business in other terms, being the damn richtige Name with its right name, bluff. Okay, so and in the next, going back to the page before, he said at the end of the article, they really go after him, and they say that he's a ganav and he has to give back everything, all the money which he made, and if he doesn't know from whom he made the money, he has to go for the Tachkon of Rabbi Yochanan and give it for Tzorchei Rabbim for the use of the masses. And then he says that it threatens that if they're not going to do it, they're going to go to the president of his kila and get him fired, and so on and so forth. He says he was heading some sort of aguda. They're going to get him fired for that too. So I don't know what Rabbi Nylander did as a result of this article. It's not recorded. But obviously back then, also like today, you had people who were trying to make money off segulas, and I don't know anything about the school on the front page of Connection, but obviously people like Reb Velvela and the Gdolei Torah of the time, even the Hasidim, the Tolner and the Radovitzer, were against this and said that certainly this is a ripoff of the public. And I believe that probably even if you hold that Kameas work, like the Tolner said, it has to be written by somebody very, very special and with a special kavanah, and it has to be written custom made for this disease. There's no such thing as a generic Kameah. So these are the rabbinic responses which I was able to find on the topic of the 1918 plague. My friend Rabban Berger, who's on the call, sent me also interesting piece, which is the rest of the handout here, of the from the Sarah Rieger, who's a famous professor, who was the granddaughter of Reb Zelig, the Dayan in Bris, her father's memoirs. And I remember that her father, I once several times went to Rav Gusman Shir in Yerushalayim, and her father attended those shiurim, and he was very, very animated in those shiurim. And I heard once that he asked, Rav Gusman once asked Professor Rieger, the father, what his son does. And he was told that he is a basketball coach from Maccabi Tel Aviv. And Rav Gusman said, "Oh, he has a pas besalo." So it was a cute reply. So so he writes here about when they the yeshiva bachrim at the close of the First World War were ready, many of them on the run. There were two different responses to the German conquest of Eastern Europe. One was to stay in place, like Telz, and the other was to run away, like Slobodka and the Vardak. And the people ran away usually got into trouble, not with the Germans, but with the Russians and the communists and all sorts of other issues because it was a lawless time. And here it describes how the plague attacked them, what they experienced through the plague, what it was. And at the end, at the bottom of page 37, after the disease of scarlet fever or perhaps Spanish flu, he was unclear as to the distinction, had passed, and the yeshiva had begun to recover, written with malaria. I succumbed to this too, but recovered. It's interesting that nowadays they want to use malarial drugs for the coronavirus. What had I done to deserve such suffering? Remains an unsolved mystery. And I think that this is an important idea. We don't know why suffering occurs. All we can know is that we should do tshuva and try and come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if each person on his own madrega, according to what they find to be their negoim in their hearts. And this comes across again from the positive responses and the few responses that we see, that people did not seek to attribute the magefas to specific sins. They didn't look for miracle cures. They were interested in following the doctors and trying to become better people. If there are any questions, I will take questions, since we're not cut off.
Rebbe, Shalom Aleichem, from Milwaukee. My understanding of the story when Rabbi Salanter asking that everybody should eat and drink on Yom Kippur was that story actually came on the heels of a widespread outbreak of typhoid or something like that, highly contagious type. Cholera. Right, lethal and cholera, and that the Rabbanim at the time disagreed with the measures that he was taking. But the script of that story that I've read that is usually not quoted is anybody who does what Rabbi Salanter here is saying is incorrect. There's a klop that follows that.
That's correct.
My understanding of the story, right?
Yeah.
Less quoted, but my understanding of the story did you find either machlokas or controversy over the measures that ought to be taken that mirror anything that we're seeing today?
Nothing like that. By that time, medicine was so accepted, even though we assumed that they got the Spanish flu wrong because they didn't know about viruses. But they knew enough that the doctors are the ones they should listen to, which back in 1848 was not so simple. In 1848, the doctors had really no significant knowledge of how the body worked. By this time, even if they were wrong, people trusted the doctors. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Rabbi Steph, for listening. I'm going to try and post this on YouTube, assuming it came out. And we should be zoicha to Chag Kosher B'Sameach and a Geula and Yeshua from this Makkah. And we should be zoicha to be able to come together in shuls and in yeshivas and be zoicha always to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim.
Amen.
Thank you. Amen. Amen. Kol Tuv.